A guten Erev Yom Tov. How many times have you heard people say the phrase, when something very sad happens, there are no words. There are just no words. We all accept that some of life has involved loss and will involve loss and sadness and grief, and we hope that there's at least balance over time with joy, with simcha. And sometimes there are tragedies that are so overwhelming, so shocking, we struggle to find words. We touch on this scary idea at some point every year when we come to the portion where Aaron's two sons die on the same day. And the Torah says, Vayidom Aharon. Aaron was silent. He had no words. I have used this phrase myself from time to time. I thought it was the best we could do to capture what seems like the outsized hurt of some deaths, or at least to relate to them, process them somehow. And then, a few weeks ago, reading some book reviews, I came across an author discussing his new book, which is called Finding the Words. The author's name is Colin Campbell. He's a writer by trade, and he lives in California. He and his wife labored hard in their careers. They worked hard to build a family, and they raised two teenagers. They had just started to turn a corner and feel their struggle turn into a taste of success. They bought a vacation home near a national park that they had often enjoyed visiting as a family. And then they were on their way back one night from visiting their new place. And I hesitate to even say it. Haya loisiya, may it never happen to anyone. Their car was hit by a drunk driver who was so high they never even hit their brakes. And the impact spun their car around twice and killed their two teenage kids in the back seat. May no one ever know from such losses. This book is about grief and loss, and it's about finding words, or as the subtitle says, working through profound loss with hope and purpose. What happened is that friends gathered around to comfort them in their grieving, and as frequently happens, their friends talked about anything except the deaths, anything but their children who were killed. Most of us, I think, have been at Shiva houses where people are talking about pretty much anything under the sun except the people who died, except the loss that the family's going through. Campbell says it was as if no one wanted to mention our kids' names because they were afraid it would make us sad. He explained they seemed not to understand that we were already sad. Nothing could make us more sad than we already were. All we wanted, he explained, was to talk about our kids and to hear others' stories about them and memories of them. What good friends they were, how much they cared about their friends, so that we could stop thinking about their deaths and start appreciating their lives that much more. Only in later chapters of the book does it become clear that while Campbell himself is not Jewish, his wife is, and they belong to a synagogue in California. More than halfway through the book, you found out that they and their kids celebrated B'nai Mitzvah. They had Friday night dinners with brachas in celebration of Shabbos, Sedarim on Pesach. As a family, they had quite an admirable commitment to these Jewish practices. So, as a couple, after their kids died, they went through the experience of Shiva. It's really quite fascinating to hear how these things look through someone else's eyes. Campbell writes that much of the rituals and regimen of Shiva was foreign to him, and he often found himself asking why he has to sit here and say this and not say that. Why did people have to come to their house and pray twice every day? All these questions. And then when he experienced it, it was somehow so comforting and reassuring to have something to do, some understanding and expectation of what was happening around him, some way to put order onto the chaos that grief had brought into their lives. Reflecting on Shiva after it was over, Campbell wrote, "I trusted in the wisdom of the Jewish tradition and did everything our rabbi suggested," which is how I learned about sitting Shiva. Shiva taught me crucial lessons about the grieving process. It introduced me to the power of rituals and showed me how central it was to involve my community in my grief journey. End of quote. He writes a good number of fascinating insights from all these experiences, like his image of leaving the graves of his children after the burial, which he says is itself a strong counterbalance against denial and self-deception. And he said walking between those two rows of community members and friends as they wish the mourners comfort, he says they're like guardrails or handrails. He said, I didn't know how I could walk forward, but these people were there to help me and support me as I made the journey. So interesting. Listen to this non-Jewish guy, a self-professed atheist, talking about his guilt for not keeping customs properly. He says that during Shloshim, he explains, Judaism considers it not proper to listen to live music, to go to the theater, or take part in celebrations. He knew that, but he rationalized it to himself that since his daughter enjoyed theater so much, he would go in her honor. He writes, this is a quote, but it was a mistake. It was painful seeing people performing live on stage. The passionate actors were so full of life that it was very hard for me to watch. I suddenly understood the edict against listening to live music. Music, theater, dance, sports are all exuberant expressions of life, and people in fresh mourning might not be ready to experience them. I wished I had waited for at least 30 days before going to see the play. Once again, I was shown the wisdom of these seemingly odd ancient rules of mourning. End of quote. All this was part of his process of finding the words, as the book's title emphasizes. As the book goes on and these parents' own journey of grief progresses, they're also, of course, drawn to other parents who have endured the loss of children. May no one ever know of such grief. But towards the very end, there's a section titled Honoring Those We've Lost. That section, as you might expect, is about mourners who channeled their grief and sadness and loss and all the other feelings of emptiness and even despair. He talks about despair and depression into changing the world around them for the better. There were scholarships set up in the names of these children. There were awards for kindness that this family established. Of course, people got involved in the campaign against drunk driving and other causes that contribute to preventing preventable deaths. The whole thrust at this point of the book is regaining connection to life and meaning and purpose. Campbell's critical of those who talk about a silver lining. He says there's no silver lining. What there is people enduring unimaginable loss, and as they work through grief, committing themselves to life and goodness and changing the world around them for the better. When we recite the Yizkor prayers on Yom Tov, this is exactly what we're doing. We recognize that our lives will be touched by loss at some point, and as hard as some of those losses are to bear, we do what we have to do. We are supported by friends. We turn back from the abyss of despair. We may be silenced at some point by the enormity of grief, but we search for words. Moreover, those of us who seek to comfort our friends in their grief must work that much harder to find the words and not let silence and sadness have the final word. At Yizkor time, we commit ourselves to stand very close to those losses that we have endured. Some of us suffered the death of loved ones relatively recently, and someone in Shul was in Shul this week saying Kaddish for a parent who passed away almost 50 years ago. There's no timeline, there's no schedule for grief. Its waves wash over us before, during, and long after the death occurs. But we don't let the waves drown us. We have a life raft. In addition to Shiva, and Shloshim, and Kaddish, and candles, and Kel Malei Rachamim, and all the other parts of grief that we lean on for support at the most difficult times. We have Yizkor, which points us in the direction of hope and purpose and helps us find the words. We mention the names of parents, relatives, others who have been part of our lives and still are, but are no longer with us in this world. We acknowledge death, and at the same time we embrace life, and we commit to it. When we say that we will give tzedakah on behalf of those neshamas who are now in the world of truth, we affirm that we still have much to do to make the world a better place. That truly is the message, not only of Yizkor, not only of Shavuos in particular, or even Yom Tov in general, but to the entirety of our lives as Jews and as human beings. We are here, quite simply, to try and leave things better than we found them. We are here to comfort, to help, to praise, to ask that suffering be alleviated, to ask that those in captivity be released, to ask that those in poverty be redeemed, and to seek out places where we can help make those things happen. We do our best through all we do in daily prayer and mitzvahs, through weekly Shabbos, the annual progression of holidays, to stay connected to God, the source of life, and to remember that godliness and holiness are the ultimate forces of the worlds, and that as small as we are and as humble as we may be, we can each do great things to help others and to bring more good into the world. Good Shabbos and good Yom Tov.